paying attention, I hope you were, you got a sense of how Jackson Pollock evolved. He didn't start with these incredibly textural, linear paintings. He grew out of a manner of art, starting with nature, right? Now, in the box by the picture, abstract expressionism. Write it down. That is the movement that he was part of. Abstract expressionism, capital A, capital E. Also known as action painting. Action painting. And it's self-evident. You saw in the little videos and the photographs that actually Pollock was in the painting. He was choreographing, almost like a dancer, and movement and rhythms and dripping. Jack the Dripper. You might write down, because that's what he was also known as. So Pollock made a big, huge mark, a huge splash in this movement. He was very much considered, in many ways, the leader of this movement that was obsessive about expressing oneself, okay? The inner self, autonomous self. You see how his art also grew out of that movement called surrealism. You saw a couple of Salvador Dali paintings, right? He was also influenced by some of the Mexican artists, Soros and several others. So he has, and even Picasso. He was recognized early in the movement by Peggy Guggenheim. You know, how do artists make connections and network, right? Peggy Guggenheim was not an insignificant patron. She was very wealthy, and she had her own museum. And so she kind of nurtured Pollock's career by starting to buy his art, right? So we see that he was fast living, hard living, almost celebrity status, tragic early life involving a car wreck, almost akin to James Dean in Hollywood. If you want to see a good film, y'all know the actor Ed Harris?
Yeah.
He played Pollock, and the movie is just simply called Pollock. Check it out. It's about the life of Pollock, and Ed Harris does a great job. And he, favors him physically. Pollock was a scrappy
Yeah, he
guy.
does.
Huh? Yeah,
He does.
Pollock is kind of a scrappy guy, as you saw, right? So we see him evolving into this very textural, rich surface innovations. He's using automobile paint in cans. You didn't see any tubes of paint, right? Turkey baster. Y'all know what a turkey baster is? Yeah. If you cook. Sticks. Everything totally innovative about the way he was putting paint on the canvas, right? To where he finally took it off the wall, spread it on the floor, and got in it, right? So his medium was industrial paints rather than traditional oil paints that artists would use in a tube. And all kinds of metallic paints that were used for cars and different industrial objects. And of course, the way he applied the paint by pouring and dripping is all new and innovative. Nobody had done that to this extent. Now, remember when we looked at Joan Mitchell, Sur un Gado, that particular painting? And I don't know if you noticed, but in the film you saw briefly a photograph of about a dozen men in suits and one woman. That was Joan Mitchell amongst the rest of the male abstract expressionist artists, right? She had to hang tough to hang with these guys. But there she was up there in the portrait. So just to make a connection with an artist that we've already studied earlier. So Jackson Pollock was it, all the rage. Abstract expressionism was a movement that held sway from the late 1940s all the way up into the late 1960s. So 25 years or more, right? Now, Who did we look at yesterday that was pushing back against art that had no subject matter? Can you remember? The artist that, yes,
Audrey.
Audrey Flack. Okay, coming on the scene in the early 70s was Audrey Flack and her contemporaries, and they were all at Yale graduate school in art, and this was the movement that they were reacting against and trying to reintroduce an object that you could recognize. So hopefully this is starting to piece together for you. Okay, next up, beside, we have Michael Baldwin and Mel Ramsden are the artists. It's called Art and Language. Joseph Stalin gazing enigmatically at the body of Lenin as it lies in state in Moscow in the style of Jackson Pollock. That's a long title, isn't it?
Yes.
I'm not going to take the time to isolate these individually, but you can just look at them side by side. This is 1948, and this is 1979. What is the word that we learned yesterday? When an artist makes art from art that's already been created before.
Appropriation.
Appropriation. Write it in the box by the picture. Here's another great example of two contemporary artists, Michael Baldwin, Mel Ramsden. They have collaborated together here, and they have revealed not only in the way their painting looks, but also in the title, that they are giving homage to Jackson Pollock, right? Now, anybody that knows the history of art, even to a small extent in terms of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, so to speak, would look at this painting and automatically think of Jackson Pollock. Oh, they're just copying Jackson Pollock. That's a given. If you don't know the history of art and you never learned about Pollock, you could not make those associations. But you have been introduced to abstract expressionism. So anytime from now on, you see a canvas with a lot of lines and dripping paint, you're going to automatically think of Pollock. It's a blessing and a curse. If anybody likes painting like that, they're going to always be compared to the master, right? But here, Ramsden and Baldwin are clearly revealing that they are mimicking the way that Pollock painted, because they're using appropriation. All right, right? Appropriation. This is a approach to making art today that a lot of artists use. They'll find someone that they really are inspired by from the past, and it's only natural that they will either use the same techniques or approaches or subject matter and reinvent it for themselves. Now, who can find him? What is different about this painting and that painting? Staring, Joseph Stalin gazing enigmatically at the body of Lenin. Can you find an embedded image?
Yes.
Where?
Well, it's like you can see the shapes that the lines make, or that they're trying to hide, I guess is a better way of saying it.
Mm-hmm.
So they did like the general shapes, the outlines, and then they did the Jackson Pollock style over it.
Okay, well, let me do this. Y'all bear with me a minute. We have to have some contextual information here today in relation to a figure, a historical figure you may not be familiar with. And if we're expected to try to locate let me find an image that I can hone in on. Y'all see him?
Yes.
Here's another. What's prominent about the appearance of Joseph Stalin?
His mustache.
Okay. The mustache is undeniably his imagery. Soviet political and revolutionary, who was the longest serving leader of the Soviet Union. Just to give us a little more context. Here we go, Alana, so you can see. And if you're not a student of history, you may have heard of Stalin, but you may not have known about him and how notorious he truly was. Here's a very elongated history. He promoted Marxism and Leninism abroad through the Communist International. He supported European anti-fascist movements during the 1930s, particularly in the Spanish Civil War. He was widely considered one of the 20th century's most significant figures, the subject of pervasive personality cult within the international Marxist-Leninist movement, which revered him as a champion of the working class and socialism. So you can see he grew out of meager means, and he rose up to become one of the greatest leaders, and surviving and being part of Lenin's government. And then after Lenin's final years, we have Stalin consolidating his power, and he was a major force in the Soviet Union for many, many years. Now that we know what he looks like, let's go back and see if we can find him. Who can find Lenin?
He's in almost the top right, a little bit to the left of the top right.
You see him right here?
Oh yeah.
There's the mustache.
There's
Here
the
are the eyebrows.
eyebrows. Yeah.
You get a little bit of reference to a nose. All right, everybody see him now? Now that you see him, you can't hardly not see him.
Yeah.
Okay? But it may have taken you a while to arrive at this. They have embedded and hidden, somewhat obscured, the image of Stalin within the painting. So the painting has a lot of layered meaning. It's giving homage both to Jackson Pollock, and it's also elevating and featuring Stalin staring at the dead Lenin. All right? So, interesting compare and contrast. You see a instant similarity of what we call style, remember that word, and technique, in the way that both of these works represent the dripping and the action and the linear painting, devoid of any kind of recognizable subject matter until we find the hidden image here. That's the difference. Lots of similarities, but therein lies the difference. So onward we go. Appropriation, abstract expressionism, and I think probably, as you saw, Jackson Pollock paintings are really quite beautiful. When you get to the Dallas Museum of Art, when you get to LaGuardia in New York, huge corporations, airport terminals feature these 20-foot long, 12-foot tall, huge paintings. And when you stand before one in a modern museum, it is a fascinating experience because there's cigarette butts, there's all kinds of things, and textures and thick paint, and you just get kind of lost in it all. And it's kind of horrific, but it's beautiful. You know, it's about line, it's about color, it's about texture, and it's about movement. So that's the whole seduction, is the scale and then getting pulled into all of the activity. That's the basis upon which we can appreciate a Jackson Pollock painting. If you're looking for naturalism, if you're looking for blending, if you're looking for impressive illusionism. That's no way to approach a Pollock, right? You gotta get your criteria right. Now, if you don't like this kind of painting, that's your preference. But once you understand his journey, and his one thing that he was fascinated with, and I think you all can relate to this, he grew up in Wyoming, and he spent a lot of times in nature, a lot of time outdoors, looking at pictographs, looking at huge boulders and rocks. How many of you have ever been, and I know you have, out to the Wichita Mountains? I can't remember the first time I went out there ever. I was just fascinated with those huge boulders, with all of the reds and oranges and the yellow-green lichen and all of the stuff that grows on those rocks and the beautiful patterns and colors that are there. Have you ever just stared at it? It's almost that yellow-green is like fluorescent. And I think, Pollock had a connection with nature that I see really with this exploration of texture and pattern that shows up later in his artwork. Okay, onward we go. Next up, we already are familiar with this type of art. The category is what?
Realism.
Oh,
Representational art. Now, realism, we have understood, is a form of illusionism with a lot of detail. Naturalism is also a term that we could use as we look at Raphael's portrait of Baldassare Castiglione. And it's got a photo-like quality, doesn't it? This is Renaissance painting, portrait painting at its best. So we don't see the kind of craziness of line and action that we saw with Jackson Pollock. But hey, this is 1514. Oil painting meant that you used
That was pretty good.
brushes, you used glazing, you used chiaroscuro and modeling. And go ahead, William, I'm sorry.
I said it was pretty good back in the day to even make pictures like this.
You
Like
bet.
there's a lot of people who can't even draw a circle.
Right, but Raphael, who had learned from Leonardo, and he'd also learned from Michelangelo, Raphael was much younger, he was part of High Renaissance, had the benefit of going and being taught these academic approaches to painting. And we know that oil was pretty new on the scene. Jan van Eyck and other Northern European artists came down to Italy to teach the Italians how to use this new type of paint. And Raphael was Johnny on the spot. He was at the right time in the right place. He kind of was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was what we would call well-connected in terms of having opportunities to go to art school and be trained by the master artists. His uncle was an architect of St. Peter's Cathedral. I mean, he was
Born into it.
right, exactly. And so he thrived and he learned these techniques, and we see him demonstrating them beautifully. Now remember, this is back in the day when there were three things that artists did. They illustrated the Bible, they painted portraits of significant people that had the means and that were usually of some status. Castiglione was a noted scholar during this High Renaissance period. He was not an insignificant type. And you see him there. He's not wearing rags coming in from the fields. He's a prominent figure of wealth and status, and he's wearing his beautiful, look at how Raphael was able to capture that soft, cut velvet cloak. Perhaps you have seen a fur garment that's got a close crop to it, and you can tell that that's soft, can't you? You can sense the softness of his beard. You see his steel gray blue eyes, and the hat that he's wearing. He's in his best. He's in his best. He's got a beautiful silk scarf, right? So Raphael was able to capture this sense of dignity of Castiglione, and we know that it is representational art, And we can all get a sense that this is a person of importance. And we don't see any wild brushstrokes because, again, Raphael was trying to give us an illusion of the actual person, and he was very successful doing that. I think we'll agree. Next up, we see an interesting image that obviously we can relate in some ways to Castiglione, but in other ways, we see a huge difference. This is a photograph. It is a very large photograph, about 60 by 50 inches, and it's part of a series, Johnny from the Nomad series. And this is in 1990. The photographer is Andres Serrano. Who knows anything about this series? Has anyone read ahead? Okay, Andres Serrano is looking for subjects, people that live on the streets that he can showcase. And he does something very interesting. Instead of just going around under the underpasses and on the curbs and everywhere else that people have to exist sometimes, and just clicking, he approaches, he asks permission, he sets up a beautiful screen, and he takes the street person out of their context and places them in a new environment. Look at how regal that blue backdrop is. And he positions Johnny and finds just the right angle and click. He captures the essence of this individual and features, perhaps you'll think about the rugged features that you see that Johnny has. It's almost like he's a mountaineer. You know, it's probably cold weather. He's got on his leather coat and some kind of fur hat. He's got a long beard, a flannel shirt. But he looks very majestic, doesn't he? Is Andres Serranos trying to degrade this individual by placing him in this environment and capturing the strength and the boldness of his image, his visage? No. He is doing the same thing that Raphael was doing here. Now, think about this. This is just part of a series of portraits. I would have loved to have seen that entire exhibition. For one thing, this is a dye deconstruction print, a big, huge digital print. So when one walks into the gallery or the museum, wherever it was first featured, you're not only seeing a photographic likeness, but you're seeing Johnny about 3 times life size. 50 by 60. You follow me? So it's going to make a huge impact on you simply because of the scale. And then y'all know how clear and brilliant digital photography has become. Unbelievable. And then you can imagine if there were 20 in the series, wouldn't that, I would love to have seen that exhibit, because Johnny was just one of many that were selected and participated in this exchange, right? So maybe if you're very interested in the Nomad series, you can check it out. It was 1990. So I just want you to look. We know that these are both representational art. Obviously, this is a photograph. It is what it is. And I think the author is juxtaposing these together just to get you to think about what a portrait can say about a person, and how the artist, think about this, the artist can shed all kinds of light on the subject, right? If you want to be represented in a certain light, perhaps a favorable light, you know that the photographer or the painter can do that, or they can actually work against you, right? Here we're in the political season, right? We got the big election coming up. It's like it never ended. And you know that people that run for public office use visual communication a lot these days. How many of you have gotten in the mail the shiny postcards of all of the folks that are running for public office, right? I get a lot of them. And sometimes they have their families on their postcard with them, and they say what their values are, and they're trying to persuade you. Well, whoever they hire to represent them, they're wanting a particular effect on the viewer, right? An artist can capture the essence of a person for posterity in a positive light or a negative light. Okay? Artists have the power to do that. And I think in both examples here, Raphael as well as Serranus are shedding a very dignified light on the subject, being the human being. Onward we go. And I don't know what image is doing this, but if you look here on the next page, we've got the smiling figure. The smiling figure. And I'm not going to take the time to replace the image, but you can see just from the waist up here, I don't know what happened to the rest of it, but you can see in the textbook, your image, that we've got a representational figure that's smiling. However, notice it's a ceramic figure, and it isn't necessarily an exact likeness of this male that's celebrating. Maybe he's in kind of a ceremony of some kind. He's got his arms upraised, he's smiling, but he doesn't have a naturalistic likeness to a real person, does he? Look at the picture in the book, because I don't have the full image. What is wrong with him in terms of, a realistic likeness? What is not realistic about how the ceramist has captured the figure? Yes.
Shape to body size.
Yeah, the proportion. He's a little bit squat. His head is a little bit bigger than his body. So there's been a little distortion of proportion.
He's on a movie or something.
He's been what we call stylized. However, I want you to think about this. Even by looking at the figure only from the waist up, can we tell what the figure is, who the figure is, and what the figure is doing?
No.
Well, I think I can. His arms are not down by his side. He's smiling. He's wearing a ceremonial hat. I can tell a whole lot. It's representational art.
Looks like he's celebrating something.
Yes. It's like looking at a cartoon. A cartoon is not like a photographic likeness, but a cartoon can tell you a lot about the story narrative, right? So this figure has been simplified, stylized. It's not accurate like this, but we still have a lot of information and we can still recognize the subject. Representational art. A little creative license has been taken. If you look at the cultural sculpture of the Mexican artists, they do this. They simplify, they change the proportion. It's just what they do. Culturally, it's a way that they depict figures. If you look at African art and African sculpture, there is a lot of alteration that takes place. If you go to Greece and look at classical Greek sculpture, no, they nail it in terms of optical reality. But not every culture wants to do that, right? So here we have a good example of a Mexican ceramic figure smiling in a ceremonial stance and happy. He's smiling, right? Okay, I gotta check this. Next up, very important. And bear with me a few minutes, Alana, while I find a good image. Henri Matisse. and I'll replace the image for us and then take us back to the PowerPoint. All right, there we are. Can you still see the PowerPoint, Alana?
Ma'am,
Yes or no?
yes, I can.
Okay, great. Now we have the image. Woman with a hat. Okay, so hat. We've looked at Raphael Castiglione. We've looked at Johnny from the Nomad series. We've seen the smiling Mexican figure. And what in the world is this? What category of art? Is it representational? Is it abstract? Is it non-objective?
Illusion. It's illusion.
Representational, abstract, non-objective. Yes.
Representation.
Yes. The color has been altered and exaggerated, but we can still see that it's a woman wearing a hat. Do you follow me? We can still see that it's a figure wearing a hat. It doesn't have a highly realistic style. In the box by the picture, write it down. Expressionism with a capital E. Henri Matisse was a French artist. This painting was created in 1905. And the French had a name for Matisse and his contemporaries. They called them Fauves. And the movement is called Fauvism. F-A-U-V-I-S-M. Please write it down. F-A-U-V-I-S-M. Who knows what fauve means in French? It means, and write it down, wild beast. Wild beast. The French critics said that Matisse was using color like a wild beast. And if you think about it, it's highly expressive, like a child. It's like a child uses color. You don't tell a child how to pick their colors. If you do, you're going to get in trouble with them. Johnny, the tree isn't purple. Well, that's a sad thing for the art, for the teacher. An art teacher, a good art teacher would never say that. Let Johnny express the tree however he wants. Matisse was trying to use color in a highly expressive way, and he was successful, and he became the ringleader of this movement called Fauvism. And you can see this is a woman wearing a hat, and we can see the bright colored palette, and God forbid that you'd have to wear a hat like that back in the early 1900s, but if you look at French fashion, those hats were like, they must have been heavy. A whole lot of baggage on top of your head, but it was the height of fashion. And we see the element of color is what has been altered and exaggerated. So expressionistic art often contains distorted and exaggerated forms, colors, textures, and elements. Another thing you'll notice is you can look at even this digital
What?
image. You can see he's not using glazing
I'm not 100% sure.
and softly blending. See how thick that paint is? It's impasto. He's loading it up. He's using big brushes. There is no illusionism like this, or like Jan van Eyck's Bonarfini painting. Artists later, in the early 1900s, or late 1800s and early, we already looked at Renoir in the landscape with the broken brushstroke, right? Fauvism is on the other side of Impressionism. So, know it as Fauvist, Expressionist, and color is the main means of expression. I think you'll agree here. Okay, And we already discussed the difference between representational art and abstract art. What's the subject? Who can tell me the subject here? The what?
It's a man,
Okay, why do you say that?
because you see a general, well, it could be a man or a woman, it looks like they have shorter hair, so I'm more inclined to just say.
Okay, we can still recognize a figure, let's just say, looking like they're wearing some kind of uniform, right? It's called Study for a Portrait. And look at the date, 1915. But something has happened to the figure. What's happened? What has Popova done?
Triangle.
Okay, the artist has taken curving lines and now we see straight lines, right? We don't, it's like you've had about, no sleep or maybe a lot of vodka. Because you see multiple images, don't you? Right? This is abstraction, clearly. We can still recognize what the subject is, but Popova has distorted, repeated, geometricized, and isolated and fragmented parts of the figure. Does everybody follow? And those are the devices that an abstract artist uses.
So is there a subject or, no?
You tell me, is there something you can recognize here?
I mean, I see something, I don't know what I.
Okay, if you didn't
Looks
have
like
the
a little
line,
shadow
can't you
man.
see a face and an eye and some shoulders?
So
You
the
may
subject would be a portrait?
Yes, it's a portrait, clearly. It's an abstract portrait. Representational, this art still falls in the representational category. We're not fragmenting and isolating and geometricizing. This clearly was formed after Picasso invented the movement called Cubism. Okay, it's a Cubist portrait, Cubism, capital C-U-B-I-S-M. Okay, 1915. Oh, but Picasso was French. Well, yes. But you heard what Pollock said about Picasso in the film.
I'm gonna miss him.
That's abstract, really.
Everybody had to try it on for themselves. So over in Russia, we have a Russian artist responding to what Picasso invented. Okay, so that's all I want to share with you right now. It's a great example of an abstract work of art. It hasn't been pushed so far that you can't still see the figure wearing a hat and some kind of uniform.
So the subject is an abstract portrait?
The subject is a figure, a portrait, but it isn't in a naturalistic or a representational style. Clearly, we have taken some creative license. Does everybody follow? Okay, so that's what the author wants you to know about that image. Now, we're going to seamlessly turn the page and go right into our second chapter. And we already know what a line is. Chapter 2 focuses on the element of line and shape. Okay, line and shape. We know that an open space, when contained with a border, becomes a shape. Right? A shape has to be established by a line. If I do this, what do you tell me?
It's a square.
If I do this,
It's a circle.
okay, you got it. Line, which makes shape, right? And remember, 5 points bonus if you can list for me the elements: line, shape, value, color, texture, time, space, motion. Could have been a good bit, right? Okay, here we have Matisse. We just studied Matisse. And I think this is a clever quote. Listen up. Remember, a line cannot exist alone. It always brings a companion along. Do remember that one line does nothing. It is only in relation to another that it creates a volume. A line does nothing. Now, if it's a horizontal line, it might make you feel passive. If it's a vertical line, it might make you feel more formal. If it's a diagonal line alone, it might make you think of movement. But when you take one line and attach it with another, and another, and another, and another, and another, you start to make a volume, right? And a volume involves depth. Line, which makes a cube that has height and width. With other extended lines, we get depth, right? So that is an interesting quote by Matisse. Nothing happens with a single line. It takes more than one line to create an image. It's just a fact. Well, maybe it looks like a flagpole. That might be an image, but it's not going to be very clear. Speaking of Picasso, here we have Picasso with a laser pen. And he's drawing in a very fluid line, making the contour of what? What's the subject?
Person.
Okay, a figure. Would we call it a figure? So we know if you look in a math book, it's going to say that a line is the distance between two points, right? It's going to say a line is a dot extended, right? So line is so profound that it's almost hard to define. It's an abstract device, but a dot extended creates a line. The line in this instance is a curving line, okay? I think we can all agree. Line can have different widths and lengths. The measure of line. Here we have a large painting created in 2009. It's 108 inches by 80 inches. Big. Kristen Baker is the artist. And look at all these lines. They're meaning, aren't they? Is she working purely from her imagination, do you think? Is this non-objective art? Non-representation? Or is it abstract? We don't really know. Oculiti der Roman is the title. Is this reminiscent of something? Anybody? Does it remind you of anything?
Reminds me of a forest.
Okay, I think so. Look, you got a bunch of leaning trees, and yes, it could be an abstraction of a landscape, or it could just be simply from her imagination. I don't know. I do know that it is not what we would call representational art. I think it is maybe an abstraction from a landscape, or
Brainstorm.
purely from her brainstorming. Yes.
It could be maybe like the ocean too, possibly.
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
In the middle could be like a fish or something in the middle.
Okay, and so the subject doesn't really matter, but what we really see are lines and shapes and colors, right? And it's large. And so that's what we can appreciate, is the line. What I want you to notice about the line is they're not all the same width, and they're not all the same length. There's a variety in the width of the line and the length of the line. And look at the directional movement. Do you even find a single vertical line? No, everything is at an angle. And this becomes what? Is that a line?
No, it becomes a triangle.
A shape. It's probably the only shape in the entire,
It's not a triangle, it's the other one. I know what type of, but you gotta look it up. But it ain't no triangle.
yeah, it is. It's got 3 points. It's not a perfect geometric triangle, but it is kind of reminiscent of an arrowhead, if you ever picked up an arrowhead. So, this is a good example of how lines can be varied and have different lengths and widths. So here's my notes for you. The direction of line, diagonal, thick, thin, short, long. And the principle that we've applied is what we call variety. Variety is what?
The difference between the length, width, and
Okay. Okay, variety is giving us variation. Variety, some people say, is the spice of life. Spice it up. You're a cook, you're gonna use seasonings, and you can take the same basic ingredients and different seasonings coming from different cultures, and man, you can make something bland taste a lot of different ways based on what you throw in there. Some of us like a lot, some of us like it spicy. Anybody eat Thai food?
What's that?
I haven't had it in such a long time.
Thai bistro
Is that Thailand or something like that?
in Thailand. When you go to a Thai restaurant, they're gonna ask you how spicy. Spicy 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Which one you get?
No spicy. Because they're spicy, even their lowest. I have been in a Thai restaurant, there's several here in town. Polly's Thai, and then out the Thai Bistro, there's another one or two. And I have listened to a couple come in or a party, and they'll ask them how spicy. And some of the guys will say, oh, 3, or this, and I'm thinking, I think I should butt in, but I just keep my mouth shut, because they're gonna be crying when they eat. Because their number 1 spicy is like, incredibly hot.
So they beat Louisiana?
Yeah. They beat the Tabasco hot sauce of Louisiana big time. And interestingly, some of the Thai women that I know from these restaurants like spicy 4. And I'm thinking, how in the world can they do it? Their taste buds must get changed over the years, because it's like they like it really
They don't
hot.
have any.
Oh my God, they don't have any left. Whatever. Anyway, so spice of life. A spice spot, sometimes we'll call it when we look at a painting. Now, back to the subject, the form, and the content. We kind of talked about what we thought the subject was here. But basically, the author wants you to know about how lines can have variation. Okay, they can have variation of color, variation of direction, variation of length and width. Here's another image. It's almost the polar opposite. I love it. Listen to the title. 3 Exact Rules. Sylvia Mangold is the artist. And it is a pencil on paper drawing. Simple pencil on paper. And it's not really large. It's about 12 by 17. And this would be kind of hard for a lot of us to do. To sit down and replicate a ruler of measure with every 1/8 of an inch, every 1/2 of an inch, every 1/4 of an inch, exactly correct. And she's done it 3 times. 3 exact rules. What kind of art is this?
Representation art?
You bet. It's representing
With the ruler?
3 rulers, isn't it? But what would you say that it means?
Actually, there's actually a ruler that's made like that they use for carpentry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and notice, and this is something that you see all the time on a coffee mug, on a yardstick, on a calendar, on a cap. Construction companies and different businesses will put their names and kind of give those out as gifts, right? If you go to the feed store every once in a while, they'll have a stack of calendars, or maybe sometimes they'll give out yardsticks and they'll have their name on there. And this is a company, the Exact Level and Tool Manufacturing Company. What is Sylvia Mangold trying to say with this drawing?
Something about the company, but I'm not
need to follow the rules.
Everybody can interpret this however they want. So go ahead, Bruce, tell us what you mean by that.
I mean. in
What does it
bus-
mean to you?
In business as well as in life, like, there's rules that you have to follow. And maybe this company maybe didn't follow the rules and she wanted to express that, or they're stickler to the rules and
Yeah.
wanted to express that.
1976. Right in the box by the picture, this is a piece of art that we call conceptual art. Right? We've learned that word before. When we looked at Janine Antoni's Gnaw. This is an unconventional subject. Someone that would take 3 rulers and replicate them. How did she form the piece? This is the L shape. Look at it. The L shape. The L shape. If you want to take compositional structure, write the L shape down. It is what it is. It's a 90-degree way that she has formed these rulers. And she's titled it 3 Vectors. Does anybody else want to say what it means to them? We don't have Sylvia here. We can't interview her. But she's left it wide open. Aiden, you have an interpretation you want to share? What does it mean to you? What comes to your mind?
So, I'm not quite sure how to put a word to it, but I get a sense of like things fitting together, like very precisely, like the ruler lines up with the pencil lines.
Okay, very good. Exactitude, precision, right? Precisely. So, I mean, that's an analogy for exactitude, right? Not sort of, kind of. When you go to measure something in construction, let's just say you're building something. What do they say?
Needs to be
Measure
exact.
twice, cut once.
Yeah.
You better get it right on, right? You don't just kind of squint your eyes and make a mark where you think a ½ inch is. You better put your glasses on, have a sharp pencil, and make a dot. And then when you go to get that that circular saw, how thick is the width of the blade? What side of that dot are you going to put the blade on? That blade is 1/8 of an inch. It will take 1/8 of an inch off if you put it on the wrong side of your mark and cut. You follow me? I've done a lot of woodwork. I know what I'm talking about. You cannot take anything for granted when you're doing construction, and you want something plumb and straight and perfect, right? Yes, Moose?
So, I don't know if it's just me, but it looks like the center ruler is,
It's
Not
skewed,
level.
isn't it?
it's not level, it's that
Yeah.
angle.
It's been angled as if it's going back in space.
Yeah.
Like orthogonals with 1-point perspective. So she's giving you a sense that this particular plane is tilting back. It plays with the spatial aspect, because it's not all flat. This tends to be leaning back. Okay, this portion of it. This is flat, that's flat, but this is at an angle that's followed up with these other angles. So it's kind of an interesting alteration. Did I? Anybody else? Okay, this is not about haphazardness, is it? Sylvia Mango perhaps is saying that exactitude is exactly that. It's right on. And we can apply that to our lives. We can apply that to being in business. Perhaps they still do this today. You got a kid, he's in trouble, in and out of trouble, in and out of trouble. He's standing before the judge. And one alternative that used to be very widely used back in the 1950s and 60s, you got a troubled kid, what's that judge gonna tell him?
Go in the army or go to jail?
Go to the army. Because if nobody else can make it, nobody else can straighten you out, they got ways they can do it. And it has worked for so many men that never had a strong leader and someone to teach them how to be exact.
Why they stop?
Well, I think that still probably happens. Go to jail or go to the army. Who knows? I think probably that applies still for people that need to get it together in life, right?
It don't work in the army anymore, though. It doesn't work on the army side anymore.
Well, I've gotten soft.
Yeah.
Whatever. I can tell you this, I used to teach high school art, 9 through 12. I had about 150 students a day. And this is at a national merit high school. This is in Shreveport, Louisiana, Captain Shreve High School, Big Shaw High School. Lots of wonderful art rooms and great materials. But I can tell you, the counselors would just put these kids in my class, just stick them in there. They didn't really pick to be in there, they just got stuck in there. And what are they gonna be for me? Other than a pain in my, a problem. And I had several nice conversations with the counselor. And I said, look, you get a kid that doesn't have a place to go, put him in ROTC. Put him in ROTC, don't give him to me. I said, because ROTC has a way to deal with them. And it's called get down and push-ups. They can deal, and I knew that, I knew the sergeant. I said, do not give me these students. Put them, if you don't know where to put them in ROTC. Anyway, it was effective. Because discipline has to be taught, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And some people go kicking and screaming, and my whole thing is you better get to liking it. When you know that something's coming down the pike, you can fight it all day long. But the best thing is to get to liking it because you can't change it, right? It's called surviving and thriving. So I think this makes us think 3 exact rules. I think of my mother. She had more than 3. But my parents were strict, and we knew where the boundaries were. That's the best thing they could have done for me and my brothers. Because there was no guessing. It's this, it's that, you're home by this time, you do this, you do that, or you don't eat. If I didn't practice my piano every day for at least 30 minutes, I didn't get my supper, right? I mean, there were no ifs. And I'm really I didn't like it at the time, but I'm really thankful that my parents were strict and had high expectations for me and my brothers. Otherwise, God knows. So booze, and y'all can all think about this. Jack, you have something to share before we move on?
Oh, yeah. One, I think, I'm not totally sure, but the leftmost rule, I think it's slightly small. They're all slightly off of each other, just vary, because the middle one, goes in at the top, because
Yes,
of perspective.
it's receding,
And the bottom one is just a plain rule. The left one, I think the width is a bit smaller than the bottom one, so it's not exactly
I'd say the opposite. This one looks wider
Wider, yeah.
wider.
than this one. Like it's closer to us, just slightly. But anyway, these are all things that you can think about. But I think you must all agree that this is not a work of art where the artist is trying to seduce you by beautiful blending and color and, that's not it. It's not an aesthetic response like that. It's more of a cerebral response, an intellectual response. Would you agree? She's trying to get you to think about exactitude and about rules or not having rules and all of those kinds of things. It's a piece that you have to reflect on intellectually. Would y'all agree? Okay. Some people don't like conceptual art, and some people just love it. Because it makes you think, and we can all interpret this in I have lots of stories that I could tell about this piece. Before we move on, I'm going to share one more with you. This is a true story, happened about 8 years ago. I wanted to build some shelves, okay? I made a list of materials. I had actually done some sketches of my shelves. And I didn't want to buy them, I wanted to build them because I could do it cheaper. I go to Lowe's, I go to the construction end of the store, and I find the man behind the desk. I said, I want these materials. I wanted some 2x4s cut in these lengths. I wanted some 1/2-inch plywood cut in, 24 by 96 inches. I mean, I had it all specified. I gave him the list, okay? I'm sitting there at the counter, and I happen to have my sketch with me. And I said, do you want this, my drawing? He said, oh no, the list is full. Fine. Come back, 2 days, give us a couple of days to process this, because they'll cut the material for you and all that, right? Okay, so I go back a couple of days later, they call and say it's ready. Okay, I go in, and you know how they have those dolly things with materials and all? And I'm looking around, I don't see my materials, and I talked to the guy, and he said, oh, it's right there. I said, no, that's not my material. I saw on that dolly a bunch of squares in plywood, like 48 by 48 squares. I didn't see any 10-foot long lengths of 2x4. I said, that is not my material. He said, well, let me see the list. Well, I went over there, and he sure enough took the material list I had left, and it was right there with the palette of stuff. And it certainly didn't match up. Okay, so he calls the guy that did the cutting up there, right? College kid, right? And I'm at the desk and I'm thinking, so he's waiting for an explanation from where's this material? The college student, who's a Cameron student, like a junior or a senior, had misinterpreted the list. Could not understand how to measure. I don't know how he got his job cutting material for Lowe's. And I could have made the biggest, ugliest scene and embarrassed that young man so badly. I didn't. I was embarrassed for him because I'm thinking, how sad is this? That he couldn't take the list of materials, measure accurately, and cut it correctly. How hard is that? Well, obviously it was hard for him. And of course, Lowe's had to eat all that material because I wasn't going to buy it. And I had to wait another couple of days. And what's the moral of this story?
It wasn't exact.
So listen, when that happened, and then we got the new edition of this book, and I saw this image in there, what was the first thing I thought of?
That story.
Boom. Do you see how your experiences bring to a work of art your own personal interpretation? That's the first thing I thought of, because I thought the poor kid, he probably never had done any carpentry work. He probably never had applied math. You know what I'm saying? It was sad. It was embarrassing. I would have been embarrassed. But anyhow, they all made it right, but I just thought, you know what? The moral of the story is this. And I haven't had any material cut for me since then, but the next time I do, what am I gonna leave with them? The sketch. Because these were shelves that were 24 inches wide and 8 feet in length. And I had, they were to go in this Connex I bought so that I could put my plastic storage boxes without them all collapsing on each other, right? Up and down the side aisles. And, got it all built, it's all great. But I knew instantly that I didn't order any squares. So I thought, I'll never do this again without leaving them a drawing. Because maybe the young man could have looked at the drawing, you know what I'm saying? And not made that mistake. But hey, that's my last story for today. We're 3 minutes past class time. Okay, tomorrow we will, believe it or not, finish chapter 2. We're not going to be able to take as much time with each image, but you need to work ahead. We're going to also take a little practice test tomorrow, okay? So that you'll have an idea of what our test on Monday is going to be like, okay? Chapter 1 and 2 is our chapters that we will cover in your study guide. And I've got these tips here. I want y'all to all come up and get study tips for chapter 1 and 2. And the sign-in sheets up here at the front. I also have this posted in the blackboard. But it'll kind of give you an idea of remembering what your bonus questions are going to be. And we'll finish up our images in chapter 2. And spend about 10 minutes taking a little practice test, okay? So tomorrow's an important day. And again, the sign-in sheet's up front here. y'all read this and bring it with you tomorrow.
How did we spell 5-7 again in one picture?
Have a good afternoon. The sun is out.
Have a good day.
I'll tell you too.